They hit her with everything they had. Bullets tore through her hull like angry hornets. Bombs fell from the sky. Torpedoes shot through the water. Shells the size of freight cars punched through her steel skin. And yet, she refused to die. This isn't just a story about a warship. This is the incredible true saga of USS Helena, a light cruiser that became an absolute legend in World War II. Her crew called her Machine Gun, and for good reason. She could take punishment that would obliterate most ships, and she just kept on fighting. But there's so much more to this tale than just surviving combat. This is a story about human courage, impossible odds, and a ship that proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is something that simply won't quit. It's about men who faced death itself and chose to laugh in its face. It's about an underdog warship that became one of the Pacific's most feared vessels. And it's about what happens when a crew believes they're unsinkable because they already tried to prove them wrong, and the ship just wouldn't cooperate. Stick around, because USS Helena's story is wilder than any Hollywood script, and it's all real. The story of USS Helena didn't begin in the chaos of battle or the heat of combat. It began in the steel mills and shipyards of America, long before Pearl Harbor brought the nation into the Second World War. Helena was born in Camden, New Jersey, at the New York Shipbuilding Company. Construction began on June 10, 1936, and for the next 3 years, thousands of skilled workers toiled to bring her to life. They weren't just building a ship, they were forging a weapon. USS Helena was a Brooklyn-class light cruiser, one of 9 sisters in her class. She was 608 feet long, weighed 9,700 tons, and could push through the ocean at speeds exceeding 32 knots. But it wasn't her size that made her special. It was her firepower. She carried 15 6-inch guns that could spit shells miles away with devastating accuracy. She had 40 smaller guns for defense and could defend herself against everything from aircraft to enemy destroyers. Every inch of her was designed for one purpose: to project American naval power across vast distances. Helena was formally christened on July 27, 1938, when the wives and dignitaries of the shipbuilding company gathered to watch her slide into the water. A bottle of champagne crashed against her bow and the great ship rumbled into the Delaware River for the first time. She was beautiful in that peculiar way that military vessels are beautiful. All business, no decoration, pure function carved in steel. For the next few years, Helena performed her duties as a peacetime sailor. She cruised, she trained, she became a floating ambassador of American power. But war was coming, and everyone could feel it in their bones. The commanders who walked her decks trained constantly. The sailors who crewed her learned their stations until they could execute their duties in complete darkness. Every drill, every exercise, every moment of preparation was building towards something. Nobody knew exactly what. They just knew it was coming. Pearl Harbor changed everything. For most Americans, December 7, 1941, was the day their world shattered. For USS Helena, it was something different. It was a wake-up call that transformed her from a peacetime cruiser into a weapon of war. Helena was actually at Pearl Harbor when the attack came. She was moored at the naval station, a tempting target if there ever was one. When the Japanese planes screamed out of the sky at 7:48 in the morning, Helena's crew scrambled to battle stations. The ship's anti-aircraft guns roared to life, sending shells skyward at the enemy planes. Unlike some of the battleships clustered in Battleship Row, the Arizona, the Oklahoma, the West Virginia, Helena wasn't in the main torpedo run, but she was far from safe. A Japanese torpedo struck her on the port side, ripping open her hull below the waterline. The explosion was catastrophic. Water poured in like a tidal wave, threatening to send her straight to the bottom. For a moment, everything hung in the balance. The damage control team sprang into action with desperate courage. They sealed compartments, fought the flooding, and absolutely refused to let their ship go down. Slowly, against the odds, they stopped the flooding. Helena went dead in the water, but she stayed afloat. Around her, the harbor was an apocalypse. Battleships were burning. Ships were sinking. Thousands of American sailors were dying. And yet, as the smoke cleared and the Japanese planes retreated, USS Helena was still there. Damaged, bleeding oil and water, but still floating, still alive. It was almost as if the ship herself was saying, "You're going to have to do better than that." The repair crews worked around the clock to get her back into fighting condition. While massive battleships that had taken hits far less severe languished in dry dock for months, Helena's damage control teams performed miracles. They patched the holes, they repaired the systems, and within weeks, she was limping back to service. She would miss the Battle of the Coral Sea and Midway, but she was coming. And when she arrived, the Pacific War would never be quite the same. By the summer of 1942, USS Helena was ready for combat. She received extensive repairs and upgrades, and her crew was vibrating with anticipation. This was what they had trained for. This was why they existed. The Japanese had conquered much of the Pacific, and the United States was finally ready to push back. Helena's first major action came during the Battle of the Solomon Islands, a series of brutal engagements that would define the Pacific War for years to come. The Solomon Islands were a string of islands running north to south, and the Japanese had established themselves throughout the chain. American forces, led by Admiral Bull Halsey, were determined to take the islands back, step by bloody step. On August 7, 1942, American forces landed on Guadalcanal, the largest island in the chain. Helena was there, providing naval gunfire support to the Marines going ashore. But the Japanese weren't about to let their territory be taken without a fight. They started sending warships down the Slot, the nickname sailors gave to New Georgia Sound, a channel between the islands where Japanese forces liked to make runs toward Guadalcanal. These became known as the Tokyo Express runs, and they were brutal affairs. Japanese destroyers and cruisers would race down the Slot at night, seeking to bombard the American positions on Guadalcanal. American ships would race to intercept them. It was a deadly game of chess played at flank speed in the darkness, with lives hanging in the balance. Helena found herself right in the middle of this maelstrom. She had been part of the American force at the Battle of Savo Island on August 8th to 9th, a devastating loss where 4 heavy American cruisers went down in a single night. But Helena had survived. She had endured, she had fought, and she was hungry for payback. The crew could feel it, the officers could see it. There was something about this ship that refused to break. The waters around Guadalcanal became known as Iron Bottom Sound, because so many ships ended up at the bottom. Between August and November 1942, ship after ship would dive below the surface, torn apart by gunfire or torpedoes or sunk by aircraft. Japanese sailors called it the same thing for the same reason. It became the graveyard where naval legends were born. USS Helena earned her nickname Machine Gun here in these waters. It wasn't just a name thrown around by admirers. It was a description of what she did. When the enemy was sighted, Helena opened fire, and it seemed like she never stopped. Her crews worked their guns with mechanical precision. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire, over and over again, sending shell after shell downrange at the enemy. In the battles around Guadalcanal, Helena proved herself time and again. She engaged enemy ships in the darkness, using her sophisticated fire control systems to rake enemy positions with accurate gunfire. Her crew became a well-oiled machine, responding to orders with split-second precision. They earned their nickname the hard way, through performance under fire when it counted most. Other American ships had their moments of glory. Other crews performed incredible feats. But Helena was different. She seemed to always be in the fight. She seemed to always be the one putting enemy ships on the bottom. And through it all, she kept taking punishment and kept coming back for more. The Japanese began to fear her. They knew her silhouette. They knew her capabilities. And they knew that when Helena was present, their operations became significantly more dangerous. Enemy sailors, when discussing the battle reports, spoke of her with grudging respect. She was the machine gun of the American fleet, reliable, accurate, and absolutely relentless in her purpose. By July 1943, USS Helena had been through more than a year of continuous combat. She had fired her guns in anger dozens of times. She had seen enemy ships die. She had seen her sister ships go down. She had survived attack after attack. Her crew was seasoned, tested, and confident. They believed they could handle anything the Japanese could throw at them. They were wrong. On the night of July 5th to 6th, 1943, USS Helena was part of an American flotilla operating in Kula Gulf in the Solomon Islands. The American ships, 3 light cruisers including Helena, 4 destroyers, and some smaller vessels, were tasked with intercepting a Japanese Tokyo Express run. It should have been routine. It wasn't. The Japanese came in force that night, but instead of the usual run, they had something special planned. They had positioned their ships to ambush the Americans, and they had coordinated their attack with devastating precision. As the American flotilla moved through the dark waters, Japanese destroyers and cruisers suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and the night erupted in flame and thunder. Torpedoes streaked through the water fired by Japanese destroyers. The American ships scattered, trying to avoid the deadly weapons. But there were so many. Helena was maneuvering desperately, her captain pushing the ship hard to starboard and then to port, trying to throw off the aim of the Japanese gunners. Then came the hits. 3 Japanese torpedoes struck USS Helena in rapid succession. The explosions were catastrophic. The ship buckled like a dying animal. Her hull, which had survived so much, shattered under the force of 3 massive underwater explosions. The keel was actually broken in 2. The ship was dying, not slowly, but not instantly either. There was a terrible interval where the crew knew what was happening but couldn't stop it. The commanding officer gave the order to abandon ship. Men poured out of the hatches, abandoning their battle stations and their posts. They jumped into the water, swam away from the dying ship. Some made it to life rafts, others clung to debris. They watched as USS Helena, their ship, the ship that had survived so much, that had refused to die so many times, that had earned the nickname Machine Gun through proven courage and performance. They watched as she slipped beneath the waves. It was July 6th, 1943, and the legend was dead. At least, that's what everyone thought. USS Helena sank in approximately 2,700 meters of water in Kula Gulf. Around 900 of her 1,200 crew members survived the initial sinking, either by escaping the ship before she went down or by being blown overboard and swimming to safety. They gathered in the water, clinging to rafts, debris, and each other, wondering if rescue would ever come. The immediate problem was simple. They were 140 survivors who had to wait and hope. The Japanese ships had withdrawn after accomplishing their mission. The American fleet was fighting its own battles in the area. Nobody knew exactly where the survivors were, and the survivors didn't have radios. They were stranded in the Pacific Ocean, in enemy territory, with no way to call for help. But sailors are resourceful people, and the survivors of Helena were among the best. They improvised rafts from wreckage. They formed themselves into organized groups. They maintained discipline and order even in the chaos. The officers who survived took charge and kept morale up. There would be rescue. There had to be rescue. The American Navy didn't leave its people behind, or at least that's what they told themselves to hold on to hope. The real trial came when Japanese aircraft spotted them. Enemy planes flew over the survivors, and for a terrifying moment, the men in the water thought they were about to be strafed. But luck intervened. The Japanese pilots, for whatever reason, didn't attack. Perhaps they had other priorities. Perhaps they thought the men were already dead. Whatever the reason, the survivors lived to see another day. For 4 days, 4 endless days, the survivors of USS Helena floated in the Pacific. Food and water were scarce. The sun beat down on them mercilessly. Sharks circled, and men whispered nervously about whether they would attack. Thirst became the great enemy, more dangerous than Japanese planes or ships. Men grew delirious in the heat, their minds playing tricks on them. Then, on July 10th, rescue ships appeared on the horizon, American vessels coming to pick up their people. The survivors were saved. They were brought aboard, treated for their injuries, and debriefed. They had lost their ship, but they had saved themselves and each other. And in the Navy, that's what you do. You take care of your crew. Now here's where the story takes a turn that seems too impossible to be true. But it is. USS Helena didn't stay on the bottom of Kula Gulf. In March 2019, 76 years after she sank, a team of explorers using advanced underwater technology located USS Helena on the ocean floor. They found her resting upright, in remarkably good condition considering the time elapsed and the depth. The discovery confirmed what had only been rumors and speculation. Helena was down there, basically intact, waiting in the darkness. But that's not the real part of the legend we're talking about. The real legend is what happened to her crew. The survivors of USS Helena were scattered to different ships and assignments. Some were rotated back home. Some remained in the Pacific Theater. But they carried with them the memory of their ship and the pride of having served aboard her. They became ambassadors of the Helena name, telling anyone who would listen about what she had done, how she had fought, how she had earned the nickname Machine Gun. More than that, they refused to let people forget. When the war ended, when the excitement faded, when other ships claimed greater glory and bigger headlines, the survivors of USS Helena kept her memory alive. They formed associations. They held reunions. They wrote letters and gave speeches. They made sure that generations to come would know about the ship that wouldn't die, first in combat, then in the memory and hearts of her people. In some sense, USS Helena never really sank at all. She sank into the ocean, yes, but she rose up again in the collective consciousness of the Navy and the nation. She became a symbol of what an American naval crew could accomplish through courage, determination, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Now here's where the story takes a turn that seems too impossible to be true. But it is. USS Helena didn't stay on the bottom of Kula Gulf. In March 2019, 76 years after she sank, a team of explorers using advanced underwater technology located USS Helena on the ocean floor. They found her resting upright, in remarkably good condition considering the time elapsed and the depth. The discovery confirmed what had only been rumors and speculation. Helena was down there, basically intact, waiting in the darkness. But that's not the real part of the legend we're talking about. The real legend is what happened to her crew. The survivors of USS Helena were scattered to different ships and assignments. Some were rotated back home. Some remained in the Pacific Theater. But they carried with them the memory of their ship and the pride of having served aboard her. They became ambassadors of the Helena name, telling anyone who would listen about what she had done, how she had fought, how she had earned the nickname Machine Gun. More than that, they refused to let people forget. When the war ended, when the excitement faded, when other ships claimed greater glory and bigger headlines, the survivors of USS Helena kept her memory alive. They formed associations. They held reunions. They wrote letters and gave speeches. They made sure that generations to come would know about the ship that wouldn't die, first in combat, then in the memory and hearts of her people. In some sense, USS Helena never really sank at all. She sank into the ocean, yes, but she rose up again in the collective consciousness of the Navy and the nation. She became a symbol of what an American naval crew could accomplish through courage, determination, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. To understand why USS Helena was so important, you have to understand the context of the Pacific War. It wasn't just about sinking ships, though. That was certainly part of it. It was about controlling ocean space and sea lanes. It was about being able to project force and protect your own forces. It was about maintaining naval superiority so that you could land troops, supply your armies, and eventually defeat your enemy. USS Helena, as a light cruiser, was the perfect weapon for this kind of warfare. She was fast enough to run down retreating enemies, but tough enough to hold the line against heavier opposition. Her guns could reach out and touch targets more than 20 miles away. Her armor was strong enough to withstand enemy shells that would shred destroyers. She was the kind of ship that could tip the balance in a close battle, and the battles around Guadalcanal were about as close as they came. The Japanese had numerical advantages in certain areas at certain times. The Americans had advantages in other areas. The battles that decided the contest often came down to individual ship performances and crew capabilities. When USS Helena showed up with her guns blazing, it mattered. It could turn the tide of an engagement. It could force the Japanese to revise their plans. That's why they feared her. That's why they were willing to commit significant naval assets to neutralize her threat. That's why her loss in July 1943 was seen as a significant victory by the Japanese. They had finally managed to sink the machine gun. But by that point, USS Helena had already done her damage. She had established a reputation that would outlast her physical destruction. She had proven that American ships could stand toe-to-toe with Japanese warships and come out on top. She had demonstrated the capability and courage of American sailors. And most importantly, she had shown that if you refused to quit, you could accomplish impossible things. The story of USS Helena doesn't end with her sinking in Kula Gulf. In many ways, that's where the real story begins. Because it's easy to be a hero in the moment of battle. It's easy to fight for your life and your shipmates when the enemy is right in front of you. But keeping a ship's memory alive decades later, long after everyone who served aboard her is old or dead, that requires a different kind of courage. The USS Helena Survivors Association was formed shortly after the war ended. These men who had lost their ship and seen their friends die came together not with bitterness but with pride. They were proud of what they had accomplished. They were proud of USS Helena, and they were determined that the world would remember. The survivors met regularly, held reunions, corresponded with each other. They tracked down younger generations, sons and grandsons of the men who served, and passed on the stories. They gave speeches to naval academies and maritime schools. They contributed oral histories to archives that would preserve their words for future generations. In 2019, when the wreck of USS Helena was finally located and photographed, it was the Survivors Association that helped organize the documentation and celebration. These men, now in their 90s and beyond, got to see their ship one more time. Not as they remembered her from living memory, but as she actually was, resting on the ocean floor, still standing proud after 3/4 of a century. The discovery made international headlines. News organizations around the world picked up the story. Millions of people who had never heard of USS Helena suddenly learned about the machine gun cruiser that had fought in the Pacific. The legend spread in a way that no amount of books or documentaries could have achieved, because it was a direct connection to that ship, that real physical object, resting in the deep ocean where it had gone down. And that's the power of what USS Helena represents. Not just a ship, not just a historical event, but a connection between past and present. A reminder that the choices we make, the courage we show, the refusal to quit even when things seem impossible, these things echo across time. They matter not just in the moment, but for generations to come. If you're watching this story, you might wonder, why does USS Helena matter? Why should I care about a warship that sank nearly 80 years ago? It's a fair question, but the answer reveals something important about human nature and about what's possible when people refuse to accept defeat. The first lesson is about resilience. USS Helena took hits that would have destroyed most ships. She was damaged at Pearl Harbor and came back. She was attacked repeatedly during months of combat and kept fighting. She was eventually sunk, but not before she had proven her worth 1,000 times over. The lesson isn't just don't give up. It's deeper than that. It's about understanding your capacity, knowing what you're capable of, and then demanding more from yourself and your team. The second lesson is about teamwork. USS Helena never would have survived one battle, let alone multiple, if her crew wasn't perfectly coordinated. Gun crews had to know their jobs so well they could do them in complete darkness or chaos. Officers had to trust their men to execute orders with precision. Men had to trust each other with their lives, literally. In today's world, where everything is about individual achievement and personal branding, the story of USS Helena reminds us that the greatest accomplishments come from people working together with absolute commitment to each other and the mission. The third lesson is about preparation. Helena's crew didn't become excellent through some magical inspiration. They became excellent through thousands of hours of training. They practiced their battle drills until they could do them in their sleep. They studied their equipment until they understood it intimately. And when the real test came, they were ready. There are no shortcuts to excellence. You get good by putting in the work, over and over again, even when you're not sure when or if you'll ever need it. The final lesson is about legacy. USS Helena is gone. The men who served aboard her are mostly gone. But the memory persists. The stories persist. The example persists. That's the real victory. Not the enemy ship sunk or the battles won, but the fact that people still talk about what they did, still remember who they were, still ask themselves if they could be as brave, as determined, as committed. There's a saying in the Navy: a ship is only as good as her crew. USS Helena was one of the best ships that ever flew the American flag, not because of her design or her engineering, though both were excellent. She was great because of the men who served aboard her. They faced an enemy that had conquered half the Pacific. They faced odds that seemed impossible. They faced situations that would have broken lesser crews, and they refused to break. They refused to quit. They refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. That's what Machine Gun Helena represents. Not an undefeated ship. She was eventually sunk after all. But a ship and a crew that embodied what it means to never give up, to never stop fighting, to never stop believing that victory is possible. Her story is important because it's a real story. It's not a movie script or a novel. It's actual history, with actual names and dates and events. These things happened. These men lived through them. And the choices they made echo through the decades, reminding us of what's possible when human beings reach down deep and find the will to persevere. Today, USS Helena rests on the ocean floor in Kula Gulf. She's quiet now, after all those years of roaring guns and engines pushed to the limit. But her memory is very much alive. Every time someone reads her story, sees a photograph of her, or learns about what she and her crew accomplished, she's fighting again. She's winning again. The machine gun never really stopped firing. That's the true power of legacy. That's what it means to be a ship that wouldn't die. Not just refusing to sink in the water, but refusing to sink into obscurity, refusing to be forgotten, refusing to let your story be lost to time. USS Helena's story is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's the courage of people who refuse to quit. It's the determination of a crew that believes in each other and their mission. It's the stubborn, absolute refusal to accept that anything is impossible. That's why they called her Machine Gun. That's why her story still resonates more than 80 years later. And that's why USS Helena will never truly die, as long as someone, somewhere, remembers what she and her crew accomplished in the dark waters of the Pacific. The machine gun didn't just fight for victory, she fought for immortality. And on that battleground, she remains undefeated.